Hi, Cal, BHP UK, and I'd just like to give you a little bit of an instructional video as to how to remove the stock exhaust and fit our Hypermotard exhaust. It's not such a difficult job. If you don't feel you're up to it, just leave it to a professional, let them do it. But if you are fairly good with a set of spanners, it should be something that you can tackle quite easily at home. Obviously we've got the advantage of having the bike on a ramp. It makes life significantly easier because the bike's raised and it's not on its side stand. But it is something you should really be able to manage at home. So the first thing we do is we'll get rid of the fairings, the rear fairings, and these are just held on by a couple of bolts. You'll need a 4mm hex key for those. And the fairing then just pulls away, pops off the bike upwards. The next thing I tend to do is I take this exhaust retaining spring off, fairly straightforward with a pair of long nose pliers. 6mm hex, and the exhaust just comes away. We've just removed our Ducati system and we've put this system back on, so everything's just coming off a little bit easier than it would probably generally come off. After you've got that, you'll need to use the heat shields from the standard system. There's just 3 M6 bolts that you can take out with a 4mm hex key. We won't be reusing these, so I tend just to put them back in the can so we can store the standard system away should we ever need to refit it. If you are just fitting the end cans, it really is a very, very straightforward job. Literally just take your fairings off, remove your spring, remount off, and it just slides away. So to assemble the link pipe and the end can, I tend to just put the clamp on. This is not tightened it up just yet, and slip the baffle into the link pipe and then the link pipe into the end can. For the Ducati system, we tune the bikes with the baffle in place. It gives us the right amount of back pressure and the right performance and the sound that we want. If you're just fitting the end cans, then you can leave the baffle out. The end cans are actually supplied without the baffle because that's really the way that they sound best. It's when you put the Ducati in that you need to fit the baffle as well. To fit the heat shield, you've got an M8 by 10mm button head and 2 M6 by 8mm. Again, the button head screws. The M8 goes to the mount at the front, and the 2 M6 screws. Just nip those up once we're all in, and then we'll tighten this clamp up and the clamp for the end can once it's actually on the bike, so we can just position it all so it looks right and it's all pointing in the right direction. Right, we then need to remove the Y piece, the stock Y piece. It's held in with a M6 bolt through here. There's a captive nut on the other side, so you don't need anything on the other side. 4mm hex key, I'll remove that for you. Now at the other end, we have seen these where the clamp is in a position that's fairly difficult to get at. On this particular one, it's just 10mm socket on there. Slacken that off till it moves off. Just watch your tools on your swing arm and such like. Once that's loose, this will wiggle out. It is easier, once you've done that, to slacken the cat off. At the front of the cat, you've got 2 downpipes that go into it, and again, you'll need 10mm socket. This side's normally fairly easy, slacken that off there. This side can be a little bit more difficult. You can either use a very shallow socket, or I can just squeeze this snap-on spanner into it there. Now at this point, to really save yourself a lot of grief, it is a really good idea just to spray some penetrating oil around here, leave it for 5 to 10 minutes, get yourself a cup of tea, which I have prepared over here. I have a general rule that there's no drinks in the workshop, and there's certainly no drinks near the ramp or the dyno, but you know what, when you own the shop, you can take a few liberties. The cat is actually just held in 2 places. There's an M8 bolt at the front here, at the top, and just behind where the foot pegs would go, we've actually removed the foot pegs from ours, you will find a A bolt you can just undo with a 5mm hex key. If you've got a T-piece hex key, it fits in there perfectly, or you can just use a long. Once the cat's starting to drop down, you can remove the Y-piece. Just be careful you don't scratch your shock. At this point I tend to remove heat shield on the downpipes, a couple of bolts holding that in place. We have on this bike already removed the exhaust valve servo cable, which drops down under here and into the exhaust valve that sits on top of the cat here. Next thing you've got to do, 17mm spanner and get rid of the lambda sensor. The lambda sensors will go back in. It is a little bit easier just to take them out like that. I think you'll find most mechanics do actually just take them out without unplugging them. Tuck it out the way here. Make sure it's not going to scratch your frame. Next thing, we wiggle out the cat from the bottom, and the cat just drops out from between the swing arm. One is there. Got a two-piece grommet on here, so we put that away for safekeeping. Next thing, 17mm spanner again, and we'll get rid of the front lambda sensor. Now on the front downpipe, we've got 3 nuts holding it to the head. Now, 2 of them fairly easily accessible. I tend to use a 1/4" drive. You don't need a huge amount of torque to get these off. Literally, I think the factory says they're about 8 to 10 Newton meters of torque when they tighten up at the factory, which is very, very low. A deep socket with a 4" extension. We'll get the top one and the one on the left hand side of the bike, which leaves the most awkward one, which is this one here. Now you can sometimes reach out with a short socket and a wobble extension. I prefer just to use 8mm spanner and work that out there. The downpipe comes away and we carefully rotate it out from here. You turn it up, being very careful not to scratch the frame. It's a little bit like the games you get at the arcade. You can put a rag in there just to make sure you're not going to scratch anything, but once you've done it a few times it's fairly straightforward. Now we get to the rear downpipe, which is probably the most difficult job. People you will hear on forums saying that it's really, really difficult. It's not really that difficult at all, to be honest with you. You've just got to be careful and patient with it, and you'll get it out without scratching anything. What you've got to do here is you just get a very, very small, a short 2" spanner, pop the ring on with your finger, and then you don't need a lot of leverage because they're not very tight at the factory, and you can just pop it down. It does actually come loose, and it just takes a little bit of patience. If you don't have a very short spanner, I know people have actually cut down a spanner to do it. The easiest one is the one at the rear on the left, and the second most difficult, we'll do it in descending order of difficulty, is the one on the right hand side of the bike. So I'm going to use a short 10mm socket, sorry, I'm going to use a short 8mm socket, a tiny little wobble extension that just gives you the wobble for that, and then a 4" extension behind that. You can reach in where the cat used to be, pop that on there. Does help if your ratchet does have a hinge on it, and then you can just work that out. Again, it does take a bit of patience. And the easiest bolt, the final remaining bolt to get the system off, and just work that out. That's it, that's your Hypermotard, leaving a very nice exposed swing arm. Everything's out, lambdas are disconnected, and you're ready for the unrestricted, decatted BHP UK system to go on the bike. So to refit the exhaust system, we'll start at the back. It's easier to fit this than it is to remove the stock system. So to fit the rear downpipe, feed it up through the swing arm and we rotate it round. Don't forget to have your gasket already in place. Now, talking to some expert exhaust guys, some people will prefer to put the exhaust gaskets back in place, and some people would prefer to use an RTV. Personally, I leave the gasket in place. Washers on first of the nuts. Top nut again is a little bit more awkward than the rest because the pipe drops away now. It's a lot easier than it was with the stock system. With the modified system, you can actually get a hinged ratcheting spanner, onto the top nut, and just patiently wind it on. But now you can have your ratchet on the outside. And because obviously there's 3 nuts holding the flange on, we get them all nipped up, and then we just tighten each one up. Like I say, they don't need a huge amount of torque on these. We then need to connect up the second half of the loop or the rear, which goes that way around. Now for here, we don't supply gaskets for these. It's just a case of using some high temperature RTV. Slide it up through the gap, line the holes up. So with the supplied M8 bolts, just go through there. There's a washer on each side. No need to nip those up too tight just yet. After we've put the second half of the loop through, we can reconnect or refit the lambda. It's about 4 turns to fit the lambda. So if you get the wires straight, which have already got a bit of twist in them anyway, when you then tighten it into your exhaust, it should give you straight wires. Just pull the sheath back and just make sure those wires aren't twisted up. And the next thing that we need to fit is this designed Y piece. So both of these bolts, we just push them up from underneath. Washer on there, and the nut. Again, there's not a gasket supplied for that joint. You can use a little bit of RTV. Okay, so front downpipe, last thing to go on before we head to the rear end, and it's just a simple case off. This doesn't have a clamp on it. It is just an expansion joint. As soon as the exhaust gets warm enough, it will expand and make a perfect seal. Just line it up with the rear, and we've already fitted the gasket onto there, and we've slid it into this rear joint at the same time. This is the expansion joint, needs no clamps on it. Do not put any exhaust assembly paste on that, please. It will seal itself when it gets warm. It's just an expansion joint. Nuts on here, short socket, 6-inch extension and ratchet. And there's enough room even to get a ratcheting spanner on there anyway, so I keep saying these need very, very little torque on them, be very careful. Now we've got the M8 bolts in the rear loop assembly. Snug these up with a spanner on each end. Then we just snug these 2 up. The top assembly. That's the decat assembly done. There is just one thing left to do, and that's to reinsert the lambda sensor. So all that remains now is to fit the end cans. We've assembled that before, it's just a case of putting the heat shield on, the clamp in place, and the bend, link pipe and the clamps. Have the clamps orientated so the bolts are facing downwards. Simply slide that into place there, and it goes to that. You can obviously just slacken that bolt off, get the end can orientated as it should be. Here we just use the same cap head that was used to hold the original can in place. We'll put a little bit of copperies on mine. Just need to tighten both these clamps up. Again, we don't need to jump on them. The larger one is actually an 11, the smaller one for the end can is actually a 10. And that's all done. Back together, just make sure they're nice and straight. And then we can just finish off fitting the fairings on the back. Just push that down into the grommet. Use a little bit of lube if you like. I tend to put something on there. Just makes them slip into the grommet a little bit easier. Just snug those up with a hex key. And then it's just a simple case of sticking the seat back on, which I'm not going to show you. I'm not even going to insult your intelligence by showing you how to put the seat back on your own bike, and enjoying the noise.